Hey everybody, ronarray here, and GG finally revealed the new Curse of the Allflame League, together with patch notes, and there are a decent amount of changes too, particularly for skills and builds. So in this video, I want to showcase the most buffed skills and talk a little more about how it will affect the endgame and builds in general for 3.29. I'm also going to showcase how those skills look and what exactly they are doing, so maybe it will help you out to pick your own build. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you appreciate such breakdowns, and let's go. So in 3.29, GG mostly focused on spells. So in that list, most of the skills I'm going to mention are going to be spells as well. And first off, we have slight buffs, which are looking like buffs when you just see it for the first time, but if you think a little more, it's practically nerfs. When GG just improving cast time for a skill by a little, but improving the mana cost significantly. That happened with Spark, Arc, and Ball of Lightning of Orbiting from the skills that people mostly play at the moment. So for all those skills, even if the cast time is slightly improved, I believe that 25% more mana cost is going to feel like a nerf and going to lower all quality of life that you have. So I'm not going to mention them in that list. And since GG also changing Archmage at least a little, it's going to affect mana stackers, especially for Ball Lightning of Orbiting. And right now they will deal 8 to 14% of unreserved maximum mana instead of 10 to 16, so that's a slight damage nerf. However, the same situation with lowering the cast time happened to some skills without adding any downsides to it. The best example of it is Absolution. Right now it will have a base cast time of 0.65 instead of 0.75. It's going to add a pretty decent quality of life, especially during the campaign. I played Absolution in the previous league myself and league started it. It's been a very solid skill, and I believe that right now it will be even more comfortable to play it, especially during the campaign when your cast time is affecting speed of the clear and speed of the progress in general. So the same situation happened with Forbidden Rite. Forbidden Rite will now deal 14% of maximum life as base chaos damage. It's previously built 12, so that's not a big buff for the damage, but there's not a single downside for Forbidden Rite itself. So it's practically receiving free damage out of nothing, and I'm absolutely sure that we will see more Forbidden Rite builds that league. However, GG also rebalanced some skill which people played before, but they were not too popular. And the good example of it is Winter Orb. Winter Orb right now will fire 2 or 3 projectiles at gem level 20, and previously it's been only 1 projectile. It will also have higher critical hit chance and will deal more cold damage, and I would say pretty significantly more. At the highest level is going to be 540 instead of 450. But just adding additional projectiles to Winter Orb is going to skyrocket that in popularity. Right now, it will be much more popular, especially considering that people played Winter Orb before. Another upside for Winter Orb build is that it usually played at Occultist with a lot of unique items. Most of the time it's at least Relic Cache, such thing as Malakai's Loop, and Veil Clash is pretty popular for that build as well. Considering that GG is adding the new mechanics to Legion, which will allow us to add modifiers to unique items, I believe it could buff Winter Orb builds even further, making it even more popular and even easier to play. So that's probably going to be significantly more solid build compared to what we had before. So the next skill which, based on projectiles and got a significant buff, is Freezing Pulse. It now fires 1 to 5 projectiles at gem level 1 to 20, and it previously been only 1 projectile at all gem levels. So again, like with Winter Orb, you're getting much more projectiles, and for Freezing Pulse, it's mostly going to improve the clear. It also got critical strike chance too, so 7.5 instead of 6, and pretty decent buff to effectiveness, so 370 instead of 330. And obviously basic cold damage on top too. I believe that Freezing Pulse could be a pretty solid option for just clearing the screen, and even if the skill itself is not going to be too popular, it still might be playable at the moment. So the same situation happened with Soulrend of Reaping. It will now fire 3 to 5 projectiles at gem level 1 to 20, so like 5 projectiles at gem level 20, instead of 1 projectile that you had before. And there's not a single downside to it. Soulrend of Reaping being used mostly with like custom critical setups, and I believe that setup is going to be significantly more popular in 3.29, because most of the skills that got projectile buffs are going to outperform the rest, because it's practically improving your damage for free. The only question is like, can you overlap the damage for some particular skills, and is it going to improve clear or single target too? So there's also a set of skills which got small buffs, such as Frostblink or Wintry Blast, for example, which only got the critical strike chance bonus, so 7.5 instead of 5. There's a few of them in the list, and I don't really believe it's going to make those skills significantly more usable. Instead, I would just focus on the skills which are working pretty nice, for example, such as Glacial Cascade, which got the crit bonus, 75% effectiveness right now instead of 65, and will deal more base cold damage. The biggest downside for Glacial Cascade that it's been very often used with mines and traps, so it will be much harder for people to utilize right now, because traps and mines got nerfed in the process. So another skill which been playable before, and some people haven't played that, but got a significant buff right now, is Storm Call. It will now have a cast time of 0.4 instead of 0.5. It will also get a nerf from base mana cost, so plus 25%, but there's an upside. It will get 270 effectiveness of added damage instead of 250, and will deal significantly more basic lightning damage at level 22. So I believe the base damage from Storm Call will be significantly improved, and together with the cast time, it will be much more comfortable to play it. Since you don't really need to spam Storm Calls that often, especially when you clear, I believe the 25% mana nerf is not going to be too critical compared to skills, for example, such as Arc, when you're getting only a little faster cast speed and no other upsides. Talking about Arc, I think out of all arcs, the biggest buff came for Arc of Surgeon. Beam now will split towards 6 to 9 additional targets, it's been 4 to 7 before, so 9 instead of 7. And cast time is also lower, but the mana nerf is there again. I believe that out of all arcs, Surgeons probably get the highest upside considering the mana nerf, but I don't really believe it get buffed early enough, so people will start playing it proactively. Same situation is currently with Ethereal Knives. Ethereal Knives been a popular skill for some time, mostly to apply Ignite to enemies, but at the moment, GG just changing some numbers for them. The most important and like the most popular one is usually Ethereal Knives of the Massacre. It now will get critical strike chance of 10 instead of 6. So that buff is not that big, it still would be playable as a variation of the crit build, maybe with a new assassin. However, I believe that it's not going to make it too big. For basic Ethereal Knives, they also swap the projectiles from quality to the skill itself, and it will deal more physical damage and will have more effectiveness of added damage too. I believe that it might help some Ethereal Knives builds to stack the damage faster, however will not make them too popular. Another situation when GG is buffing the numbers themselves but the skill itself is not really too playable is Armageddon brand of Volatility. Right here we have a pretty decent buff for effectiveness, 520 instead of 370. So the number here is huge, and also significantly more fire damage. However, I believe that Armageddon brand of Volatility is very uncomfortable to use, so even if numbers are looking great for the skill, I don't really believe it's going to be too popular just because of how it plays by itself. On the other hand, such skills as Blade Blast and Blade Fall is practically getting free buff out of there. For Blade Blast, we'll have more radius, even if a little, and we'll have 10% crit instead of 6. And for Blade Fall, we're getting 160 effectiveness instead of 140, and more physical damage, which is a pretty significant buff. I believe the option, when you just play like Chieftain with Blade Blast and Blade Fall, is going to be more popular in that league, because that combination of Blast and Fall always been playable if you are alright with just clicking 2 buttons instead of clicking 1. With the same situation With improving the mana cost, GG also buffed all variations of Crackling Lance. So the basic one, the branching and disintegration. Usually the most popular version being Crackling Lance of branching, so right now it will have a pretty decent amount of improved effectiveness, so 370 instead of 330, will deal more lightning damage, and I would say significantly more lightning damage, and have a less cast time too. However, the mana cost will be improved as well. But I believe that Crackling Lance of branching and just like repicking to any variation of other Crackling Lances is going to be a pretty popular option that league, just since it's going to deal much more damage and mana cost is not that bad for such skill as Crackling Lance. Same situation happened with Divine Ire. All variations of Divine Ire got more damage effectiveness, they also will deal more physical damage, so Divine Ire could be a pretty solid option. However, Divine Ire by itself been used with totems most of the time, and since totems are getting nerfed, I believe the Divine Ire is not going to be used as a self-cast, just because skill is not really comfortable for that. At the other hand, GG decided to buff Firestorms, so mostly Firestorms of Meteors and Firestorms of Pelting. Again, we have more effectiveness and more basic fire damage. I think the biggest buff right here comes for Firestorm of Meteors. It will even get less mana cost too, so that's probably one of the skills that never received the improved mana cost nerfed, and just received a buff overall. However, I don't really believe that Firestorm is going to be popular for any variations of a few niche builds. Before that, Firestorm will mostly used with Wrathpith, but that league, Wrathpith is getting nerfed, and I believe the percentage of people playing Firestorm will also go down, even if the numbers for the skill itself went up. The same situation happened with Lightning Tendrils. The skill itself is playable and people played it before, so right now it's receiving a pretty decent buff, especially for the normal version. 190 effectiveness instead of 130 is pretty big, together with more lightning damage and even more basic radius too. Same happened with Lightning Tendrils of Eccentricity and Lightning Tendrils of Escalation. So all of Lightning Tendrils variation got buffed, and I believe it's going to be a pretty solid option to league start the casters. Another skill that got a slight buff is Tornado of Elemental Turbulence. Right now it will have 80% of effectiveness of added damage instead of 65 it had before, and more general physical damage. It still could be played as a variation of additional damaging skill in bow builds, or just a self-cast spell too. The next step for GG is also changing the supports. At the moment, I think the biggest buff came for the Unleash. So Unleash right now will have 26% less damage at the maximum level instead of 36 that it had before. And Greater Unleash will have 23% less instead of 31. I believe that buff is pretty big, and it's mostly going to affect just Blade Vortex builds, because most of the builds that are currently using Unleash is just Blade Vortex all together. And the last thing that got a pretty solid buff is Barrage. Barrage right now will have 44% less damage instead of 62, will fire 4 additional projectiles instead of 3, and will have 10% more attack time per projectile. It previously been 5, so it will be a little slower. But in the end, it's looking like a pretty decent damage buff. However, I don't really believe it's going to change much, because Barrage never been too popular and been mostly used just like in the bow builds for single target, but at the high investment, bow builds don't really need that, and like at lower investment, most of the time bow builds not really focusing on killing bosses. However, maybe we'll have at least a little more usage for Barrage in general, even if it's going to be still pretty niche. So let me know in the comments what skills you're excited to play in 3.29. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. ronarray out.